Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Purple Insider Extra. Matthew Coller along with Sam Ekstrom here as we continue with our What Happens to This Guy series, looking at players with some key decisions to make for new general manager Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. And we move on to Dalvin Cook. Now, I think most Vikings fans would say, Dalvin Cook. Why would you be talking about moving on from Dalvin Cook? But this is a new regime. His cap hit is nearly $13 million for next season. And if you look at any chart ever made about running backs and their value and where it goes after the age of 27, it's usually not up. Sam, do you think that Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah wants Dalvin Cook in his backfield at his price?
I think that Dalvin sticks around at least one more year. When an offensive-minded head coach comes in, even if he's pass-centric, I think he could appreciate Dalvin Cook's talent, number one. I think he could maybe see down, like in the future, if we pass it more and save Dalvin's legs a little more and include a change of pace back, much more than the previous regime, we might actually get more production out of Dalvin Cook. We might get more games played out of Dalvin Cook. And I think that Dalvin has needed a head coach to come in and reel him in because he wants the workload. He wants to touch the ball 350 times a year. And they've let him because they've been convinced they were a run-first team. And I think the best thing for Dalvin would be a reduction in workload. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, oh, why would you reduce his workload and pay him that much money? Well, the contract isn't great to cut if you want actual cap space in free agency. There is a post June 1 designation where you could shed that money and save like $9 million or something. But if you're cutting post June 1, you can't really use that money very effectively. And if you cut in pre June 1 for free agency, you're only saving a couple $1,000,000. So I think practically it makes sense to keep him around for 1 year, see how he works in a Kevin O'Connell offense. Maybe the screen game gets going again, and then reevaluate when he's much easier to cut contractually in 2023.
I agree. I mean, even some of the best running backs in the league aren't putting up even 1,000 yards per season because their teams are using them a little more smartly. I think of Alvin Kamara for this, where they use him obviously as a pass catcher quite a bit more than the Vikings use Dalvin Cook, but they're not running him all the time. They would always have another running back in there, whether it were Mark Ingram or Latavius Murray the last couple of years. And the Vikings have just not wanted to do that. They want Dalvin Cook and Dalvin Cook all the time. But in the backfield going forward, you'll still have Alexander Mattison, but also Kene Nwangwu is there as well. And if you're talking about kind of a three-headed monster, yes, one player is more expensive than the other players, but at the same time, you probably can get more out of Cook. If you look at his production from the first half of the year to the second half of the year, almost every season it's gone down in terms of yards per carry in the second half of the year because the injuries start to pile up, the workload starts to pile up, and we just don't see the same sort of burst out of Dalvin Cook that we saw before. Now, the other side of the argument is that if you make that space, then you can use it late, right before training camp to sign someone. There's always a couple of free agents who sort of slip through the cracks and become that late free agency signing. One of them was Melvin Ingram, the defensive end who ended up signing with Pittsburgh and then getting traded and helping Kansas City, but he didn't sign until the very last minute. So you can create some space for that. And then for the future, the other thing, it would be a signal that the Vikings just don't believe that paying a running back that kind of money is the wise way to go. Now, the places Adolfo-Mensah was before, San Francisco and Cleveland, both spent at different times on running back. So I don't know how he feels about it, but it would signify like this is just not an efficient way to spend the money, even if the player is good. And also it would be based on a projection for the future that if he's already had the injury history that he's had and the workload that he has, you are not projecting the future to be as good as it was in the past.
Yeah, I'll back you up on that. If it means you lose Dalvin Cook for 2022, but you adopt the philosophy that investing in the running game that way is not smart, then I am in support of that. I think that you could probably get similar production, even if not as high end, similar production if you went out and drafted a day 3 running back who could come in and be a change of pace for Alexander Mattison, who's entering a contract year. Kene Nwangwu obviously has the potential to be very explosive, and I think utilized correctly could be a huge weapon and one of those guys that touches the ball 8, 9 times a game with absurd efficiency. You see that in some of these offenses like San Francisco, for instance. They churn through running backs and they seem to all be very good. And it doesn't matter who's carrying the ball. They just kind of have that scheme in place that makes it work. So you lose the high-end games from Dalvin Cook, the healthy games where, he looks like he did against Arizona, for instance, and everything clicks and he looks like the best back in the NFL. But then you also avoid the stretches where the Vikings a lot of times would play Dalvin Cook heavy reps when he was not at his best. And I think it was an impediment to the offense. And when you have a three-headed monster and diversify the workload, that's more unlikely to happen. And that's just better for your football team.
There's another part of this too, that when Dalvin Cook came out of college, he was presented as somebody who could be the modern running back, the running back who catches balls out of the backfield, can go down the field if you needed to, line up at wide receiver. And we haven't seen any of that. And I don't think that he's shown really from his hands. He's had kind of a lot of drops when they throw him non-screens, that he's that kind of guy. In fact, you would trust Alexander Madison and his hands more with just from what we've seen. And I think that could be another part of it too, is if you're looking to make your offense as diverse and as dynamic as it could possibly be, if your running back can only really do one thing out of the backfield from a receiving standpoint, I think that hurts you a little. I mean, Deebo Samuel in San Francisco is a guy that everyone's going to point to. Can we find the next Deebo Samuel? Can we find the next Cordero Patterson, even for what he did in Atlanta? It doesn't need to be that extreme where the guy is a wide receiver / running back, but there is a lot of value in being able to line up your running back at receiver and send him down the field or send him over the middle of the field. That's just something the Vikings haven't been able to do with Dalvin Cook. And I wonder if they look at it and say, if somebody calls, then we will answer the call and be interested. And there's another part too, and I don't know where this ends up going, Sam, but the off the field issue has to be a part of this calculation, because even though it is not a criminal issue necessarily, first of all, there's a possibility that it could become one at some point. But also, like, this was a problem for Dalvin Cook in the past, and then it cropped up again. And so are you willing to risk that it becomes a future problem? And that's not to say that I know exactly what happened with Dalvin Cook's issue with his former girlfriend. It's just that when you have several incidences like this, you start to wonder, is this going to be a consistent problem?
Yeah, I think you've laid out the red flags really well there. And I think the moral of the story is, don't cling too tightly to Dalvin Cook. If you're a fan who's thinking about, buying the new number 4 jersey, or if you're management, treat the running back position a little more fluidly. The Vikings for forever, have been locked into Adrian Peterson, into Dalvin Cook, and it's been the workhorse guy. And over, the last 15 years since they drafted Adrian Peterson, workhorse running backs are out of style. They're obsolete. Teams always have a stable of them. And I think if the Vikings adopt that, that's one sort of advancement to become a more modern offense. And that type of thinking is what's going to make them more efficient under Kevin O'Connell.
Right. The best season that the Vikings had under Mike Zimmer, it was Jerick McKinnon and Latavius Murray carrying the load. So look, if you want to listen to more Purple Insider extras or just everything that we have, check out the podcast by typing in Purple Insider. Subscribe to us here on YouTube, or go to purpleinsider.substack.com to read our written work. And we'll catch you later with more of what happens to this guy.